Okay, so very first topic is Ben Carson. Ben Carson has been making a lot of news, and before we continue, let's
Flash to
take
the clip.
hit the clip, Sam.
Also like you to get back to me, if you don't mind, to explain the disparity in REO rates. Do you know what an REO is?
An Oreo?
No, not an Oreo,
R-
an REO.
Real,
REO.
real estate?
What's the O stand for?
E organization?
Owned, real estate owned. That's what happens when a property goes to foreclosure. We call it an REO. And FHA loans have much higher REOs. That is, they go to foreclosure rather than to loss mitigation or to non-foreclosure alternatives like short sales than comparable loans at the GSEs.
Okay, so as you can see, there's a lot of big confusion between Oreos and Oreo cookies,
Yes.
and I guess I can see this mistake happening from many different people in this nation. However, the
And just to
person
make
in
it
charge
clear,
of HUD should not be confused by this.
right? And just to make it clear, even the lady who was commenting and asking him about REOs kind of gave a wrong definition. She basically said that REOs are properties that are foreclosed, when the actual acronym itself simply means real estate owned. So Mark might have an REO of his properties or portfolio. I have an REO list of my own portfolio of properties that I own. That's all it means, real estate owned. But with respect to HUD, it's the properties that they own because they foreclosed on.
Yeah, and to give a little context on where the who's the senator that was interviewing?
You know, I missed her name, but she was basically asking Ben Carson, who's supposed to be responsible for HUD and all of these different aspects, questions pertaining to HUD, how to make it more efficient, and she's simply asked about the inventory that has currently been foreclosed on. Now, of course, if it's been foreclosed on, then that would imply that something wrong went with the underwriting because they didn't properly vet the borrowers, and so it came back into the it had to be essentially bought back after the loan defaulted.
And we're going to see a lot of this type of scrutiny because after what happened 10 years ago with the financial crash, well, now a lot of people are going to be scared if they see foreclosures even tick up a little bit, even though it's also normal in some markets to see a spike in foreclosures, just like anything else. So there is a certain percentage that will naturally happen for whatever
in any
economic
type
reason.
of business model, you have some level of underwriting that is something similar to a vacancy factor. And so again, they have a default rate, and so they expect to take properties back in foreclosure. So they're asking Ben about this, and you could clearly see in his expression, he had no idea what he was talking about.
She even she asked him to identify what REO meant, and he said real estate organization.
Right, real estate organization. And so so now here's the other thing, is that at first glance, it's real easy to look at Ben Carson and just think, what a buffoon, he's an idiot. But the guy's actually really, really smart. He's just not in his proper place. He's a brain surgeon, isn't he? And he's performed amazing brain surgeries throughout his career. But then talk about a fish out of water. He's appointed by Trump to be the head of housing and urban development.
And that was basically a thank you for supporting him during the campaign.
Right. It's just something that he probably didn't have any context for, had no prior background, and clearly, because he's a brain surgeon, you don't just go from being a brain surgeon where you have to have some intense level of knowledge and then jump into something else that you have need an intense level of knowledge, but has nothing to do with each other. Brain surgery and housing, just because you're a smart person doesn't necessarily translate well, as can easily be seen by his expression.
So now the concern is, well, he's been running HUD now for a couple of years, and what kind of effects are happening at HUD that could affect real estate properties?
Well, a lot of it, when the housing crisis occurred, they really revamped the way they underwrote deals. So, for example, they increased the amount of debt-to-income ratio. When I first got into the business, for example, and you would pre-qualify somebody, there wasn't a differentiation between full doc and no doc. It was a stipulated set of documentation validating that your social security, your job history, your current revolving debts and credits. And later they loosened those guidelines so much that they started giving, good loans or good money to people that weren't really going to maintain those loans. And of course, the housing crisis and a lot of foreclosures, and then all this scrutiny on HUD, and then now you put Ben Carson in charge of it.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate because with someone that's not qualified to run it, they clearly don't understand how things work in the housing industry. And if they don't understand that, how can they make proper decisions and choices to effectively run HUD. And I think we're seeing a lot of problems with Section 8, with funding, with a wide variety of issues,
FHA.
including accountability with their own finances. I mean, Ben Carson was in the news about a year ago when they found out that one of his first things getting into office was spending $32,000 on an office room table.
Yeah, which was not very bright. So now let's put it back in the context of like, how does that affect real estate? So remember, I was prefacing this with the housing crisis, and then all of a sudden they instead of just having regular doc and going from no doc, where it's a very loose set of documentation that you need to qualify, they go to this over level of qualifying somebody just to make sure it's underwritten properly. So now you have, of course, Trump, who's wanting to loosen a lot of those regulations, which, were kind of tight to begin with because now they tightened it up a little too much. And you have somebody like Ben Carson who is in charge of that, not necessarily knowing what he's doing. It could definitely have different effects. It could make it easier to get a loan, which could be a positive or a negative, as we could see that when it's too easy to get a loan, then you have a lot of players jumping into the market and then ruining the market for everybody, which is what essentially happened in the housing crisis mortgage crisis 2008 to 2012, where the FDIC just shut down several thousand banks.